Want to talk a little NFL. I know everyone is saying, man, the one thing that these sports radio shows just don't do enough of is talk about the NFL and the NFL draft. I wish these shows would have spent more time talking about the NFL draft. Well, don't worry. Kinner's here to save the day. But everyone believes I'm the most critical person in the history of the world when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, I think that being critical is what I am. I'm not being a hater. I'm not making things up. I'm not imagining that the team has won 6 games in 2 years. I'm not imagining that they've won 12 games in 3 years. I'm not imagining any of these things. I think that anytime you have a team that struggles to win consistently, anytime that you've had a team that's drafted in the top 5 in back-to-back seasons and is projected to pick in the top 5 again, according to a lot of mock drafts or way too early mock drafts for next year, I don't think that I'm hating. I think that I'm being pretty realistic and I'm being critical, but I get it. Fan, short for fanatic. You want everyone to tell you your team is great, even when they are not. But I want to bring on an individual who, of course, he ventured down the road of giving a grade to a lot of these NFL teams following their NFL draft, and he happened to give a very interesting grade to your Cincinnati Bengals. We have Brent Sobleski joining us with Bleacher Report. Brent, welcome in, man. I appreciate your time today.
No, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. And I just feel like I've wandered into the audio version of a Spider-Man meme where there's pointing at each other.
And that's the thing. So, but see, you have, I feel like Bengals fans might accept your criticism or hate or whatever they call it a little bit more. No? You felt the wrath of it too?
Oh, for about a week straight. And look, let me explain myself. I'm just going to go right into
So you
this.
gave him an F, just so that we set the tone. The context is there for the listeners when we talk about the criticism. You gave the Bengals an F for their draft grade.
I did, and it was nothing to do with Jamar Chase. So let's get that out of the way first and foremost. To me, the reason there was a failing grade was based on a very simple premise. I believe they failed in their commitment to properly building around Joe Burrow. And when you go 2 straight off seasons and you don't fully commit to what you're to trying to build your offensive line around a number 1 overall pick. To me, that is the wrong way to approach proper team building. Your prioritization is incorrect. I understand there was needs elsewhere, but you had an opportunity as an organization to, 1, address your biggest need, 2, do so with arguably the best tackle prospect of the last few years, and yet you still did not do so. And that's where I continue to scratch my head. And I understand that A.J. Green's gone, and they needed an X receiver, and they needed someone to create separation. This isn't about Jamar Chase. It's about the team and the way they're trying to build around Joe Burrow. And I want to see him fully realize his potential and not be harassed consistently because of a porous offensive line.
Yeah, and that's where I came from. I came from that same angle as you. I kept preaching the importance of prioritization. We had a lot of Bengals fans that would call in and say, "But Kinner, they need a wide receiver to create separation. They need this." I'm like, listen, they've won 6 games in 2 years. They need a lot. Okay, so you got to take those needs and prioritize them. And I just felt like they drafted a want versus a need when it comes to Jamar Chase. And again, I'm glad you specified what you did at the beginning. This isn't, Jamar Chase isn't worthy of being picked where he was. Had the Bengals addressed the offensive line better in free agency or even in last year's draft, then this year they could have had the fun of going to get the fun toys. That's the fun part of rebuilding. I know losing sucks, but I'm a Browns fan, and after going 0-16, it was so fun watching them draft Baker. They get Denzel Ward, they got Jarvis Landry, then they win 7 games. They start having some fun. They got a little too ahead of themselves, though. The mistake that the Browns made, Brent, was that they got ahead of themselves. The offensive line was very good Baker's rookie season, and then they got rid of Zeitler so that they can go get Odell Beckham Jr., and all of a sudden the offensive line took a step back, and it's like, well, was that worth it? Was it worth it having a lesser offensive line to go get the new toy in Odell Beckham Jr.? It obviously wasn't, and I wish the Bengals would have paid attention to situations like that around the league.
Well, there's multiple ones, and the Browns are a great example because they did go out and get their 2-star wide receivers before addressing the worst offensive tackle spot in football. And it wasn't until they drafted Jedrick Wills and signed Jack Conklin and also hired Bill Callahan that they put the number 1 offensive line on the field and became one of the league's best teams. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but it just shows you how they took a backwards approach. And a lot of the guff I've received from Bengals fans, and I understand what their argument, but I don't think it's properly placed, is with the Miami Dolphins at number 6, because they also took a wide receiver, and I didn't give them an F. Here's the difference. They waited a year. Last year, they drafted their quarterback at number 5 overall. And what they do directly after that, first round offensive tackle, second round offensive tackle, fourth round guard. They immediately went about building their front. And by the way, they added another second round tackle in this year's draft. And so when you place those positions at a higher value, and this is something that also needs to be discussed, offensive tackle in general is a premium position. I think we all accept that, right? It's one of the 4 premium positions along with quarterback, cornerback, and pass rusher. Wide receiver is not. No matter how we slice it, teams are generally looking at offensive tackle being at a higher valuation if all things are considered equal to wide receiver. And so when you have Sewell and Chase graded similarly, you're going to tend to give the nod to Sewell. In my case, I didn't think it was necessarily close. With our Bleacher Report scouting department, we had Sewell ranked 4th overall with all-pro potential. Chase was in the next tier down. He was 10th, a little bit lower on our grading scale. So when you consider all of that, that's why I felt it was a poor decision. And to your earlier point about other teams doing the same thing, look at the Kansas City Chiefs. Look at the Los Angeles Chargers. They fully committed to building the offensive line. They didn't just go and sign one veteran on a 1-year deal. They didn't just hope that a couple guys get healthy and they played marginally well this year. They went out and significantly addressed it and rebuilt their fronts to make sure they protect their star young quarterbacks.
Brent, there's the movie Step Brothers, and there's a certain scene in there when they just, they look at each other, they go, did we just become best friends? Man, you are badass. I am so glad I found you. This is so great because I've been looking for someone like you to come and back me up with this stance a little bit. You were literally word for word backing up everything I've been preaching for the past couple of months. Let me ask you this too, because the one thing that's interesting about the Bengals is they've had the opportunity. They had $40 million in cap space, okay, for this past free agency. Riley Reiff, I like that addition, but it kind of canceled out because you only got him for 1 year, and people act like the draft is supposed to be you draft a player for next season. This is about setting the tone for the future, and Riley Reiff for one season to me just doesn't get the job done. You had a chance to get a tackle in Penny Sewell for the next 10 years potentially, or at least for the entire journey of Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. That's where I was like, why would you sign Riley Reiff for 1 year knowing that he's going to be clogging the spot that you would be drafting the number one need or the number one player at the number one need that you have? I thought they didn't just fail in the draft. I thought they failed in free agency as well because they had the cap space to do it, and they ignored the offensive line there as well.
Well, I'll disagree while agreeing with you simultaneously. I know that's weird, but listen to what I'm thinking.
Going, Brent. Damn it, we were.
What I'm looking at with Riley Reiff is this. I think he's a good addition. I agree with you in that regard. But he's 32 years old on a 1-year deal, as you stated. Now, what can you have done with Riley Reiff to make the entire offensive line better? If you draft an offensive tackle, which Reiff should not have prevented at all for those 2 reasons we just stated, if you go back to his history with the Minnesota Vikings for the last 2 off seasons, there were rumors that he was going to move from left tackle to guard depending on what was available to them if they were able to upgrade at the position. He came up publicly and stated, I have no problem moving to guard as long as it helps the team. So if you go and get a Sewell and you play him a right left tackle, which wherever you want to keep Jonah Williams and allow him to play, now you bump Reiff into guard. That improves 2 positions simultaneously. That's why you get added value by adding him and then drafting Sewell. And that's why a lot of people keep coming at me and saying, well, Riley Reiff's going to play right tackle. That should have no bearing whatsoever on the decision. If anything, it should have helped the decision and made it easier because, to me, you get better along your front 5. And you're correct. They didn't. I understand it's Cincinnati, and they're a team that's not on the up and up at the moment. So it's more difficult to have that allure of signing top free agents. But I knew going into free agency, they were interested potentially in Corey Linsley. They were interested in Joe Tunney. Obviously, the contracts those 2 signed, which were basically position setting for guard and center, probably priced them out of that conversation. But if you really want to improve, you need to be in those conversations. You can't say, oh well, we can't sign that guy. We might as well go get a cast off from another team that was cut for salary cap reasons. That's pretty solid, but he's older, and we'll just keep him around for a year.
Yeah, and I just felt the reaction. Again, we're almost done beating up on the Bengals because I want to ask you about the positives from the draft and not all the negatives, but I'm all about the negative, man. I love drama. So when it comes to that, so the goalpost kept moving back and back and back from fan reaction at the beginning. I mean, it was Team Sewell all the way, back in October and November and December. And then all of a sudden, it's, when Jamar Chase starts getting brought up and everything, then all of a sudden I'm starting to hear Bengals fans try to, and you talked about the generational talent that is Penei Sewell. You started having Bengals fans all of a sudden trying to convince themselves that, he's not that great. We don't need him. We need Jamar Chase. And that there's just as many first round options in the second and third rounds at offense, or, for the offensive line that they could choose from. The most irritating part about that is I was actually starting to agree with some of the fans that, okay, maybe you could take Jamar Chase and elite wide receiver talent and still get a first round graded talent in the second and third, and then it will complement it as a great draft overall when it's all said and done. But they didn't even get any of those damn names that they were all preaching at me. They passed on some of them names to get Jackson Carman, who could end up being great, but you are not in a position to gamble with Joe Burrow's career right now. I just don't get the reach for Jackson Carman there in that second round.
And part of the general manager's job is knowing valuation, right? They need to understand how others around the league view talent that they may like more than others. And that way they can manipulate the draft to their liking. So, ironically, we could be having a different discussion because there were first-round capable talents on the board at offensive tackle, whether we're talking about Tevin Jenkins, who could have immediately moved in at right tackle. Maybe you like Liam Eichenberg, that will probably start at right tackle for the Miami Dolphins. There was even Walker Little that if he had been healthy and didn't opt out, probably would have been a first-round offensive tackle. Yet Cincinnati decided, in their infinite wisdom, to trade down and miss out on all three of them and then draft a guard. A guard, might I add, I'm going to go back to our rankings from Bleacher Report. There were 9 wide receivers drafted from that point on until the end of day 3. We had at least 7 of them graded higher than Carman, if not significantly so. So that gives you an idea of how he was being viewed just as a pure talent beyond the Bengals organization. So that's the thing that bothers me is, you could have made what I believe a bad situation a little better by getting the type of talent in round 2 and start stacking guys throughout the draft. They did not do so. And then there's an argument that, they end up drafting 2 more guys after that. You could have done all that while still drafting Sewell overall instead of making excuses and rationalizing why they decided to go with a wide receiver in the first round. So I'm looking at it, and it's just, to me, it was mistake after mistake, and through the first 2 rounds, hey, but at least I'll give 100% credit here. I did give 1A to the Bengals draft class, and that was to Joseph Asai in the 3rd round. So I guess we could talk about that as a major positive.
I mean, and it absolutely was. And my one concern about Cincinnati, too, from an outside the draft perspective, they've spent close to $250 million combined the last 2 off seasons on addressing this roster. And that's concerning, Brent, because they're still a last place team in this division. The only team I think they can maybe flirt with is Pittsburgh, but I'm still going to give the edge to Pittsburgh because it's Pittsburgh. They're still going to be in last place in this division. And no, that's not me hating. It's just their offense isn't better than the Steelers, Browns, or Ravens. Their defense isn't better than the Browns, Steelers, or Ravens. So I'm not sure where they are at right now as far as evaluating the ROI, the return on investment between the draft and free agency the last 2 years. I just don't know if they've done enough to try to capitalize on the rookie contract of Joe Burrow right now heading into year 2.
I agree, and that's where it's so concerning. I think Joe Burrow is an absolute stud. His season in 2019 was the best single season I've ever seen from a quarterback prospect. I've been doing this for a little while. So I think his potential can be through the roof. And he has the skill positions around him to be excellent and to really tear up the league. I'm not denying that whatsoever. But with the quarterback play, he can be ruined very quickly if he's under a constant barrage of pressure. And that's where the major concern is. We've seen it throughout the history of the league that if you can't properly protect the quarterback, things are going to go to you know what. And so, look at Philadelphia. They thought they had their guy for the long term in Carson Wentz, and things started to fall apart. Now, people will say that's an organizational thing. Also, they had a ton of injuries in the offensive line. They couldn't protect him. He tried to put too much on his shoulders and lost his confidence, and it just did not go well. You mentioned the Browns before. Go back to how many quarterbacks could not make it because they didn't have the pieces around them. and we're constantly shell-shocked. So that's my concern. It's not that I think Cincinnati is completely botched it from a perspective that Jamar Chase won't be good. I do believe he will be. He will be in the long run. But at the same time, it's all about that quarterback. And as soon as you get that quarterback, your next step is always building around him, specifically protecting him properly. And I find it ironic that all offseason, the one position that Cincinnati spent a ton in free agency and then a ton of resources in the draft was the defensive line. So they obviously understand the value of the trenches, just the wrong side of it.
I mean, to be honest, they didn't lie. They said they were going to focus on the line. They just never really specified which line, and they technically did not, go back on their word. Just so you know, if you want to get more evaluation from the fans on how this interview is going, right now, Brent, Doug Morgan on Facebook messages in saying, this is the most depressing interview I've ever heard in my life. He's a Bengals fan, so I knew I wasn't going to make more friends today.
Well, I'm trying to be as nice about this as I could possibly be because I'm not doing it to just to rip the Bengals. I'm not doing it to inflame and get people all jacked up. And I even wrote an article simply to for people to understand my reasoning. And I had no intention of doing that originally. It was something that came up Monday, like, hey, look, maybe we should address it. So I did. But at the same time, you're right in the fact that you always ask the question, are you getting better or are you getting worse? And there's no middle ground there. And so when it comes down to it, when you're in the AFC North, which is already one of the better divisions in football, can you say as the Cincinnati Bengals, I am a better team and I can compete with those squads within it? Cleveland now has a top 5 roster, period. Baltimore, you still have Lamar Jackson and everything they can do on the ground game, plus a good defense. Pittsburgh has faults. There's no denying that whatsoever. Their offensive line needs built too, a rebuild as well. But that defense is still very good. We'll see what Ben Roethlisberger has left, but they have weapons as well. I don't see where their pathway towards long-term success is in Cincinnati unless they find a way to make Joe Burrow become the player we all think he can be.
All right, Brent Sobleski with Bleacher Report, NFL analyst, again, was given grades to all the NFL teams following the draft. The Bengals received an F, which caught a lot of attention, of course. But with that being said, it wasn't to hate or to pile on. It was strictly from the perspective of what we've been talking about on this show for months and months, almost a year now, is the perception of it's not about who you take, it's about who they didn't take, and they did not address that offensive line properly. Brent, I need 2 more minutes of your time. You've been very friendly with your time today, so I appreciate that. But I want you to take a listen to something. I worked very hard on this masterpiece. It's my 30 for 30 called We Just Can't Have Nice Things about the Cincinnati Bengals. Take a listen.
If the Cincinnati Bengals don't draft an offensive tackle, they should be disbanded and revoked from the NFL. They got to keep this guy upright and healthy. It was irresponsible what they did last year.
What if I told you that the Cincinnati Bengals learned nothing from Joe Burrow's season-ending injury in 2020?
Now Burrow, oh boy, clutching his left leg. Oh no.
With the number 5 pick overall and the best tackle available, the Bengals pick seems pretty obvious.
I don't think that there's even a question. When you have a shot at Penei Sewell, you take him and you keep your quarterback upright so that he doesn't get murdered every single Sunday.
But if Penei Sewell was sitting there, Joe Burrow's season ended because you couldn't protect him. And Joe was playing really well. To me, absolutely, it's a no-brainer. Protect your asset.
What if I told you that the Cincinnati Bengals failed Joe Burrow once again?
The Cincinnati Bengals select Jamar Chase.
Oh, you've got to be f***ing kidding me. What a bunch of...
Hey, easy now. Easy. Voice guy, come on, stick to the script. Just read the script.
Oh, my bad. But seriously, what's wrong with them? Fix the O-line, man. Anyways, it's Justin Kinner's latest award-winning 30 for 30. This is why we just can't have nice things. The embarrassing and disappointing tale of the Cincinnati Bengals.
And there you go. I worked very hard on that, Brent. And if I would have known that I had you out there to help me collaborate with this, I would have definitely reached out.
Hey, I got a couple chuckles out of it. I know it's frustrating for some Bengals fans. I get it. And I want to be completely honest. They weren't the only F I handed out.
Oh, what other Fs? What other Fs?
The Raiders and the Packers both received first-round Fs, so they're not in it alone. They all meet at the bar afterwards. But in all honesty, it was very similar situations. I try to take into account, not just individual talent, team needs, who's on the board, overall situations. And, you look at the Raiders, you think to yourself, okay, are they better because of where they took Alex Leatherwood after deconstructing their offensive line? My answer is no. Green Bay, you are in a public imbroglio with your quarterback who just wants to have weapons placed around him. You have a chance to do that. What do? Take a cornerback. Not the right idea. So, it's not just Cincinnati, and I tried to stay as consistent as I could under those bases. And there were a couple instances where I felt that those teams failed in their direction, which way they should have went.
All right, good stuff. Brent Sobleski, again, with Bleacher Report. Good enough to hang out with us here today. I asked for 10. You gave us way more time than that. Listeners, I promise you, he's not a Bengals hater. This was just a fun conversation because of all the heat I've been getting. I just needed some backup for a day. But overall, to be honest, Brent, we all just want the same thing. The people that are mad at us, we all want the same thing as them, and that's for Joe Burrow to succeed. It's just we're all going in circles, but ultimately we all want the same thing. So Brent Sobleski, Bleacher Report, NFL analyst, good enough to hang out with us today. Brent, thanks so much for your time, and have a great weekend, okay?
No, thank you for having me. Everyone, be safe out there. And also, don't forget, this weekend's Mother's Day. There's your reminder.
There you go. Hey, man, take care. I appreciate your time.
Have a good one.